Hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening, good people, wherever you are, wherever you happen to be, and however we're together. Thanks for being here. I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Head. So, what's in my head? Uh, th- I don't know what part of the country you live in, what part of the world for my viewers and listeners that are around the world, but it's been windy as hell for a while now. I call it like cartoon wind. You think about those old cartoons where the wind will blow and people will just go tumbling off the screen. Cartoons, cartoons, not people, but people in cartoons. There you go. Would just go tumbling off the screen, or some superhero would just blow and just tumbleweeds would go flying everywhere. I feel like it's been like that for a long time. I actually posted on social media in the last couple days, and this is a direct quote. Is it me, or has it been windy as hell for like 482 months straight? Seriously, that's what I posted. It's just been so windy lately. And I thought maybe I was tripping. Maybe I was just, so busy that when I actually relax and settle down, it just happened to be windy every single day for like 2 months. And I've lost count of the number of times I looked out my window, and I'm gonna date myself here, but I looked out my window and I just knew that this tree was about to poltergeist my house. And by this tree, I mean all the trees that surround two sides of my house, so that anyone could take their pick. But it's been gusty, windy. And again, I don't know what part of the world you're from, listening or watching right now. Thank you for tuning in wherever you're listening or watching. But maybe it's been windy for you too. I just decided randomly to Google this if you want to. Exact words: more windy 2025. That's all I Googled. And the first AI result, because Google now gives you AI results to start, was quote, yes, March 2025 was exceptionally windy, with the National Weather Service (NWS) issuing record numbers of high wind watches and warnings, and 24 states experiencing a top 10 windiest March. Top 10 windiest March, 24 states. So I'm not tripping. It's been windy as hell. Now, the very first article that popped up after the AI result was an article entitled, "This March was the windiest on record." Over 1,500 reports, if you look at the article, over 1,500 reports of wind damage were submitted to the National Weather Service during the month, far more than any previous March since records began in 1950. 1950. And if you look at this graphic I just put on the screen for those watching on YouTube or Spotify, if you look at this graphic, I'm on the East Coast of the United States. That's where my house is. Look, you can't even see, by the way, the state that I reside in, because there are so many reports on the eastern half of the United States. And it's again, I thought I was tripping. I thought that I was just maybe, I don't know, a little sensitive to wind suddenly. Um, but it seemed like almost every day there were just these huge gusts where like the house is whistling. It feels like the house is mini shaking. You look out the window and trees are doing like the what's the dance where you go under the pole, whatever that's called. I can't. I'm blanking right now what it's called. But fortunately, knock on wood, there's been no damage that I know of. There's been now, obviously, there's been 1,500 reports nationwide of wind damage, but none for me or anyone I know, thankfully. In Philly the other day, by the way, a random tree collapsed on a car. Car just stopped, I'm assuming at a red light or traffic, whatever it was, and somehow, miraculously, whatever you believe, a pretty substantially sized tree fell on the back half of a car. And the person who was in the front seat was able to get out. Now, I didn't read further in the reports to see if, I'm hoping there was nobody in the back seat. I'm guessing there was nobody in the back seat because the person wasn't, maybe I'll say, freaking the hell out beyond just, the fact that a tree fell on my car and I survived. And so I'm freaking out a little bit, but not like freaking out, freaking out, freaking out. Now, you may or may not be a climate change believer. You may be one of those people who say, the planet is cyclical, so just because, this is the far more we've surpassed since 1950, since the records were being kept. It's just happening. Something, happened before and it's part of the cyclical. You may be one of those people. It's cool. I know from what I can remember in my life, I've never experienced this much wind for an extended period of time. Now, here's hoping, because we're in April now, here's hoping that was just, March. They say March comes in like a lion, and then April showers, May flowers, or, how March comes in like a lamb and it goes out like a lion. Who knows? Whatever it used to be. We know what I'm talking about. But if it came in like a lamb, which I honestly don't remember, and went out like a lion, which clearly it's been roaring lately, and for a long time, then perhaps, now that we're past this phase, we can get on to the next parts of spring and into summer. But one thing it's made me a little apathetic to, I typically like to go outside and start raking leaves and raking branches and kind of cleaning up, preparing for the best time of the year, which is when it gets warm. Anytime it's warm, over 70 is a great time of the year. But I didn't do that this year because it was so windy. It was what was the point? I spent more time picking up trash that wasn't mine, that blew from neighbors or the next county over, I have no idea, than I even worried about prepping for seeding and all this stuff, because I had to actually do that at some point, kind of seed and all the stuff you're supposed to do in the springtime because you want grass to grow. And last year we did a great job of growing our grass and all that stuff, so that we could have barbecues and blah, 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 blah. But thankful, very, very thankful that there was no damage. And this wind phase, hopefully, maybe it was like a global or earth menopause or something like that, or premenopause. Maybe that's what it was, in the form of wind, where it just blew the hell out of the entire country. And now we're cool. Some people may roll their eyes like, what does this have to do with menopause? It just popped in my head and I went with it. Before I get to the last thing that's in my head, Dave's Head Podcast is now a part of the Alive Podcast Network, home of Black voices, where community, culture, and creatives live. Dave's Head Podcast adds to the catalog of over 70 titles available in the Alive Podcast Network and app for both iOS and Android. Check out Dave's Head Podcast and many others in the Alive Podcast app, the home of Black voices. The last thing that's on my mind is summer peak. And by peak, I mean P-E-E-K. Peaking. At least I think that's how you spell it. Peak as opposed to peak. Peak? There you go. Now, April brings Easter and showers. I just talked about that. Now that we've survived the windy line of March. Looking at the 10-day, and I'm not endorsing it at all, have no relationship with, Wonderground, who I prefer to use Wonderground for my weather forecasting and all that stuff. But they have a 10-day forecast, and even you can go look at the calendar and look at what the averages are in one view. You see an amazing trend on the horizon. 70s as a high, 50s as a low, as a norm, or give or take, 2-3 degrees, or what I like to call a peak into the summer. We're approaching that wonderful time where we can go sit out on the deck or the patio, or just take a chair and sit outside if you want to. Put it on the grass and just enjoy the sun. Have a cigar, have a drink, play some music, do nothing, but do it basking under the sun and warm-ish weather. Hopefully less wind. Now, it's that time of the year where I'll say normal folk, people like likely most of you, wear shorts and tank tops. Me, I wear shorts and tank tops 365 days a year. I don't really get cold like that. I go outside in shorts and t-shirts in 40-degree weather. It's not that cold. It's also the time of year where music starts to be played more outside. Car washes get a little fuller because, everybody's got to floss and, might see that girl, might see that guy, all those things. Or if you're like me, I can't wait to wash my car. My tires and rims are so disgustingly oily and dirty. I have tools that I have. Now, I will say this. I may walk outside in shorts and a t-shirt. I'm not washing a car in 40-degree weather. Just not happening. Too much water. I'll freeze my butt off. Fun fact for you. My summer job, my freshman year, or I guess it was winter job, not summer job, between first semester and New Year, first year in college back in 1995, a long time ago, I actually detailed cars outside in the winter. Fun fact for you. Do you know how hard it is to keep warm water warm in the winter? You know how hard it is to clean cars that are almost or partially frozen and dry them in time before the water ices up? Yeah, whole nother story, little trauma I experienced, whatever. But it also means we can start to go for walks, get some fresh air in the house. Allergies be damned. Hopefully letting air in the house doesn't trigger allergies for some of you. But depending on where you are, it could be time to also clean and fire up the grill. My old house, I had a nice, substantially sized deck compared to the one I have now at my new house. And there was never a bad time to grill, by the way. Rain, snow, I clear a space, go to the grill. It just happened. 365 days a year, I could grill as long as there wasn't active, dangerous precipitation. And so now it's becoming that time again. 70s, we're going to approach 75 and lows of 60, or 80, lows of 65. But it's a peak. It's a peek into what many like me love about the year. Summer. I'm a winter baby. Born at the end of December. Best time of the year. Between Christmas, New Year's, week-long party. It's amazing. But give me sun, sand, good company, and a refreshingly cool drink, and I'm in my happy place. And so as we get that anticipation building, I've golfed a little more lately outside, a little warmer weather, 60, 65. I don't golf under 50, just a thing. I may walk around in t-shirts and shorts. I don't golf under 50 degrees. It's open air, windy, doesn't feel good. But give me those things, and I'm in my happy place. And so what we're getting and walking into slowly, now that the wind's going to hopefully die down, the rains will start to come, the flowers will start to bloom, the grass will grow a little more. My property where I'm at just cut the grass for the first time the other day, first time for this year. As we get that peak into summer, one of the things that we'll do here at Dave's Head's house is clean out the garage. It's going to be a task. But it will be a task where the garage opens up, the weather will be nice, there'll be a refreshingly cool drink and some music, and maybe even after, the grill will fire up and there'll be some good food. So summer peak. Gotta love it. That's what's in my head. So back at the end of last year, 2024, Harvard Business Review published an article entitled Continuing the Work of DEI, No Matter What Your Company Calls It, by Joel Emerson. You can find it on their harvardbusinessreview.org website, hbr.org. And one of the things they say is, reading the headlines, some might believe that we're witnessing the end of corporate DEI in the U.S., but this is an assumption that's short-sighted and overly simplistic. I bring this up because obviously with the current times we have, it might not have been so simplistic and short-sighted. And so they say that activist success in villainizing DEI has depended in large part on the lack of shared understanding about what the acronym actually means or really means. And anti-diversity advocates say the DEI is all about quotas, or is antithetical to merit, or is a form of Marxist ideology seeking to artificially engineer identical outcomes for all people. It creates a boogeyman. And I've talked about this during the season a couple of times. We've actually had a couple of guests on talking about DEI, but this boogeyman effect that many people and companies don't want to be associated with. And you look at the different companies, Walmart's, the Targets, all these companies have made changes to their DEI initiatives. And you see that boogeyman effect taking effect, and also the push from government as well. So they produced a report, The State of Culture and Inclusion 2024 Trends and Look Ahead to 2025. And they looked at aggregate data from 220 organizations across more than 20 industries. And they compared it to their 2023 data. A couple of key facts here. 60% of companies surveyed had a DEI strategy. which was a 9-point increase from 2023. 66% had a DE&I budget, which was a 12-point increase from 2023. And 73% had committed to incorporate DEI into their company values. 2023 was 72%, so virtually unchanged. I bring those up because I'm curious to see when they do the study again how that translates to what's happening in 2025. And so they talked about 3 things that companies can do to go from here. And I'm going to talk about those 3 things and elaborate just a little bit. So they said resetting the narrative, using data more effectively, and embedding DEI into their organization. So starting resetting the narrative, they said the coming year you'll continue to see companies rename their DEI initiatives, and instead of viewing that as a cause for alarm, we should remember that when companies stop calling DEI, they could be doing it somewhere else. The second thing was using data more efficiently. And so just saying that every employee matters isn't enough. To help employees believe it, organizations should set strategic, data-driven goals around initiatives that are clearly business relevant. They said in 2024, they found that 52% of companies defined explicit outcomes and success metrics for their DEI programs. Lastly, embedding DEI into the organization. They say that organizations should focus on embedding DEI into their systems, processes, practices, and organizational culture. At the end of the day, good DEI practices are good talent practices, they say. My humble opinion, while I believe that a reset is certainly needed, given the current climate, and not just in DEI, in government and the perception and how people even view DEI, what they're educated on as it relates to DEI, the use of factual data. I'm a data guy. I've worked in data 30 years. I love the passion. I'm passionate about data. Data tells a story that you wanted to tell sometimes. And we've gotten to the point in society where we don't trust the data. We don't trust the science a lot. Very skeptical. And so it's hard to fight the demonization of data and science when the loudest person in a room carries more weight than the one that's telling the truth. And so I 100% believe we should reset the narrative. We should, most certainly, I'm always a proponent of using data more effectively and efficiently. And that will lead to better integration and embedding of DEI in organizations. Now, you may be wondering, Dave, you talked about DEI a lot this season. It's a hot topic. It's something that keeps coming up. There's so many offshoots and spider webs and all those things that relate to DEI and what's going on today. And so I do want to bring in my guest, and there's a reason why. I'm bringing my guest, Paolo Gaudiano. He is an entrepreneur, speaker, author. A little bit more about him. With degrees in aerospace engineering and neuroscience, Paolo jokes that he had already done rocket science and brain surgery before facing a really complex problem, which was convincing business leaders that they can make more money by creating more inclusive organizations. Paolo is the founder of DEI tech company Alaria, hopefully I got that pronunciation right, and the research nonprofit ARC. A former tenured professor, he's an adjunct at NYU and the chair of the annual D&I Research Conference. Paolo is a sought-after speaker, author of award-winning book, Measuring Inclusion. Lastly, kind of fun fact about him, the quote-unquote white guy in DEI, his TED Talk, What DEI Gets Wrong and How to Do It Right, at TEDxHarlem in 2023 is featured on the TEDx website with over 300,000 views, literally as of yesterday. I checked yesterday. So, welcome to Dave's Head. Paolo, how's it going?
Dave, thank you so much. Wonderful introduction. Really appreciate it. I'm doing quite well. Thank you.
I'm happy to have you. And I did mention that, we've had a couple guests on this season, talked about DEI. There's been conversation around DEI that I've given my own opinion this season. But I think it's an important topic to keep doubling down and drilling down on, because there's so many facets of it and so many ways we can have this conversation. And we talked before we started recording. I looked at your TEDx yesterday. I have this, dream someday of doing TEDx as well. Whole different conversation. But I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things I'm going to do is share that with my audience, and I encourage you to take a look at it. There's some really great points in there, really great conversation. And while it wasn't a conversational TEDx, it could spawn a lot of conversation from the various points that you made. So definitely congratulations on it, and wanted to say that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was a lot of fun. And actually, I was very lucky. It was my second TEDx. I've done two. And that one, I was very fortunate that after doing it in Harlem in 2023, at the end of 2023, in March of 2024, the TED organization reached out and said, "Hey, we love it. Can we post it on the on the main TED site, which is actually why it's got so many views, is because they actually posted it as they kind of rebranded it as an actual TED Talk, and that gave it a lot of visibility, which I was very, very grateful for and delighted that people have enjoyed it. I'm glad that you enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say this, and my audience, you won't know what I'm talking about unless you actually watch his TEDx, but there's something about speaking to people in cold environments that it throws you off a little bit. It kind of sharpens your mind just a little bit more when you're comfortable. Temperature's great. You kind of just lose. You might be, go off script a lot more. But I think when you're in a colder, chilly environment, it kind of refines you and keeps you going from A to B to C more directly.
Yeah. So if I can tell you just a very quick funny story that I don't usually share with people. When because it was my second TEDx talk, the first one I had a coach, and they really, even though I like to think of myself as a good speaker, I know I can always do better. And this woman really, really helped me to make better slides. So this time around, I was prepared, right? I did this beautiful deck. And the day before the conference, I wrote to the organizer, whom I knew was kind of somebody that I know pretty well. I was like, hey, I forget, can I read my laptop, or do I have to, send you the slides? And it says, didn't you read the instructions? There's like no laptop, no screen. It's just you and just speaking. And so I literally had to redo the entire talk in 24 hours. Not redo it, but I had to basically practice it in my head in 24 hours without visuals, which was a really interesting experience. And as it turns out, funny enough, I think it came out better because I think I spoke from the heart. I didn't have props. I didn't have, usually I like to show my computer simulations, but having to just keep a thread going like that. And you're right that the cold room was relevant to parts of the talk, but also it did help. I think that if I'd been sweating, it would have been a little bit more difficult. But thank you. I'm glad that you appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get started, I do like to offer the opportunity to my guests, and I know I did an intro of you briefly, but I do like to offer the opportunity to my guests to introduce themselves to my audience. So if you could take a moment, tell the audience who you are, what you do, and what you're about.
I appreciate that. In fact, if you watch the TED Talk as you have, you'll see that every time that I do a talk, I always start by jokingly referring to myself as the white elephant in the room. It's like, what is a white dude like me doing in DEI? And so, briefly, yes, I studied math, computer science, and then aerospace engineering. And then I got into computational neuroscience. So I really, truly have worked on rockets and I've worked on brains. But eventually, most of my career was focused on how do you quantify the link between an individual and the collective. So first, it was about how do a bunch of individual neurons, which by themselves are very stupid, simple organisms, how do they combine into brains so that we can see, speak, move our hands if you're Italian like me. And then eventually I moved that into understanding how people, when they get together, they can do things like companies and societies and drivers on highways and things of that sort. And it was about 15 years I spent, after being in academia for 10 years, I left academia, became a consultant and entrepreneur, and focused on helping large organizations solve really complex problems in business. And it turns out that a lot of them were about talent management. And then about 10 years ago, this light bulb went off. I was personally interested in DEI, but I always thought, look at my face. I'm not an activist. What could I possibly do? And then one day, as I was listening to the umpteenth session on DEI in technology or in marketing, and I was contemplating the stark difference between the very detailed experiences that people shared of things that happened to them because of their race, because of their gender, because of the sexual orientation, because of their disabilities. And when it came to solutions, it was very vague. Oh, we need to dismantle systemic racism. We need to, change the hearts and minds of corporate America. And I thought, how do you close the gap between the individual and the collective? And that was like, wait a second, this is what I've been doing now for 25 years, first as an academic and then as an entrepreneur. And so I got super excited, dropped everything that I was doing, spent about a year doing my own research, building these computer simulations that were based on what I've been doing for the previous 20, 25 years, and realized I was onto something really exciting. And then I spent the remainder of the time really educating myself, understanding that I used to say that I was passionate about DEI. I had no clue. I was, your typical well-meaning white dude that thinks that because I've gone to a BLM march or bought one of their T-shirts that made me somehow really cool. And but I really had no idea. And now 10 years later, I realized just how little I still understand. But I also realized that because of my identity, because of my privilege, I'm able to do something that is very important, which is that I can get in front of people who look like me, who by virtue of the fact that I'm white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, I got a PhD, I was a professor, I got a book, I got a TED Talk, they will listen to me as if I'm God's gift to DEI, even though I'm not. Unfortunately, they will listen to me very differently. You can take my words, my slides, my talk, you give it to them, they will just not listen to you. And you know this, right? It sucks, but it's a reality. It's much easier to convince people from inside a group than outside. And so now I see that as a responsibility, an opportunity to use my privilege to actually convince people who look like me, but also I understand how they think. I understand what means, what moves them. I understand what upsets them and what actually drives them. And I found that my role a lot of times is kind of a buffer where I work with a huge number of people in DEI and I try to help them to understand how some of the things that they're doing and they're saying may not land right and why. And then I try to do the same in reverse as well. So I feel very fortunate that I'm kind of at that nexus where I can kind of be on both sides of that fence, so to speak. And unfortunately, these days, it's become more like a wall than a fence. And I try very hard to break that wall down and really get people to talk from the two sides.
So that's a very interesting journey, and you actually answered my first question, which was going to be how do you go from aerospace engineering and neuroscience to the white guy in DEI? But I think the first question I have now is what hurdles? DEI is boogeyman. I talked about this in my intro for you. It's boogeyman now. It's the taboo thing for not only individuals, for business, for government. What hurdles did you face jumping into DEI, having that conversation with people who look like you, people who like me? The TEDx that you did in Harlem, the few shots that I saw of the crowd, they were a bunch of people who look like me. Did you have difficulty initially breaking that, that exterior wall to say, hey, I understand, I know a little bit, and listen to me?
So yes and no. I mean, people in general have been incredibly welcoming. I think that anybody that sees that you have a good intention and you're trying to do something good, most people react very positively. There have been a few times when I've had people that, literally criticized me and said, what is your right? What right do you have to speak about this stuff? And I understand that, but that's rare. That's really rare. And one thing that I think helped is that even from the beginning, I never went and told people, I have some ideas, I know what to do, etc. It's like, I am ignorant. I have some ideas that I think I can bring into the space, but I need help figuring out what is the right way to do it. I need help figuring out how do I position it? How do I say things in a way, because I need to become aware. I will never know what it's like to be a black man or a black woman for that matter, right? I will never know that. And pretending that I do it's really silly. I think it's important for me to be, and maybe humble is too strong of a word, but it's just to acknowledge that here's what I know. And here's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And as Rumsfeld, Donald Rumsfeld back in the day was criticizing for talking about the unknown unknowns, right? But it's a reality of life. I mean, there are a lot of things that I did not know that I did not know. And so people, I think in general, my approach was never about, here's my idea, let me explain it to you. It was always more about, hey, I have these ideas. Do they make sense? And what do I need to improve to make sure? Because ultimately, it's a marketing problem, right? I'm trying to use language that will make sense to people who don't look like me, and language that will make sense to people who do look like me. It's a little bit like code switching, right? I mean, you all know better than I do what that means, but I truly code switch. Like if I'm talking to a room of white dudes, I use language that you may find somewhat objectionable. You may find, why is he saying that? And conversely, when I'm talking, when in a room with a bunch of people who are not white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, I appeal to ideas, etc., that some of my white colleagues and friends might say, what the hell are you talking about, right? You have to do that. And I really enjoy that. I've always been a bit of a chameleon. I grew up in a different country, so I've always appreciated being exposed to a variety of cultures, a variety of ideas. And I think that actually helped me a lot to be more prepared to address kind of the multicultural and, aspect of the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is you're just meeting people where they are, right? You have to meet people where they are in order to help them get to where you want them to go. And that's code switching 101. Let's take a step back, though, for a second and actually define DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you actually define it? There's tons of descriptions, generalizations, completely wrong definitions, but how do you define DEI? Let's start there.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a premise and as a way of an apology. I've been writing more and more articles about the fact that I think one big mistake that we have made is that we have left the door wide open because we've been so vague about some of the definitions. And I would argue especially two mistakes. So diversity, most people agree how to define it, more or less. Inclusion, you ask 10 people, like literally I did an exercise recently. I have like 30 books on diversity, equity, and inclusion on my shelves. I pulled down all the ones that talked about inclusion in the cover, and I tried to find the definition of inclusion. And every single one of them has its own definition of inclusion, if they define it at all. And they're all different. Sometimes it's about the feeling, sometimes it's whatever, it's about the company, the culture, whatever the case might be. Equity, we have been so, and I'm sure you're aware, all these discussions about equality versus equity and kids peering over a fence to look at a baseball game and kids picking apples from apple trees. And unfortunately, because we've left these vague, what's happened is that it has made it possible for people who hate DI to come up with their own boogeyman definitions that are essentially feeding on the fears of white people that feel like, oh my God, I'm going to get left out because I'm not black, I don't have any opportunities, which is absolutely ridiculous. But unfortunately, all you have to do is hear one guy that says, oh, I was supposed to get promoted and I couldn't get promoted and because they had to hire a black man, right? And so that spreads. Now, the way that I define DI, and I'm sorry about the long premise there, but based on the research that I've been doing in these computer simulations that I build, I see something very simple. And it comes from, first of all, I have to say it's from the point of view of an organization, not from the point of view of feelings of individuals. What I say is that inclusion is what you do, diversity is what you get, and equity is what you want. And to me, when you think about, again, a collection of individuals that contribute to what the organization is all about, inclusion is what you do refers to the fact that if you are allowing different people in your company to have different experiences that impact their ability to succeed, just because of their identity, then you're not being inclusive, right? So it's what you do as an organization. It's whether you're actually allowing these disparities to happen within your organization. The reason why I say diversity is what you get is, and I've shown this through my computer simulations, but it's because if you have one group of people that is less satisfied than another, they're going to be leaving your organization. And in fact, there is a ton of data that shows that inside organizations, you have at the entry level, McKinsey showed that at the entry level across the US, white men make up 34% of the population of the workforce. By the time you get to the executive level, they make up 57%. That means that white men inside the organization, as they progress, they're picking up 23 percentage points at the expense of the other groups. So to me, it's a leaky bucket. And so diversity is what you get because we are doing things inside the organization. We're not being inclusive. That causes certain groups to leave. And when we look at our diversity, it's bad. So the more inclusive you are, the more diverse you're going to get. And then the last piece, the reason why I say that equity is what you want is that the way that I define equity is to say, look, if I have these groups, again, let's take, for example, black people and white people or people of color and white people. Okay. If you find that white people have a satisfaction level of 90, whatever that means, and people of color have a satisfaction level of 80. That means that two things will happen. One of them is that the productivity of people of color will be lower because we know that if you're less satisfied, you produce less, which means you're making less money. And they're more likely to leave, just like I said before, which means that you have to pay money to rehire people that are leaving. So that means that you're hitting your top line by reducing revenues, and you're hitting your bottom line by increasing your costs because you have to rehire people. So if you're creating any kind of a inequity, whether it's differential promotions, compensation, whatever the case might be, that causes one group of people to be treated less well because of exclusion, it will cost you money. So if you find any inequities, you want to drive them to zero because they're costing you money, which is why I say that equity is what you want. And it also makes for a very easy target, which is not, oh, we need to have 13% black people because that's how many people we have in the country. We need to have 51% women because that's how many women in the country. Or, we need to look at our population that we're serving. Instead, you're saying, find inequities, drive them to zero. Who's going to disagree with that target, right? It's not racially based. I'm not saying find inequities for people with disabilities or for queer people. I'm just saying find any inequities and drive them to zero. So again, inclusion is what you do. Diversity is what you get. Equity is what you want.
So for the do part, the inclusion part, how do you actually measure that? And I think I talked about this in my opening, that there aren't a lot of measurables. I forget what the percentage was, and I can run back to it really quickly, but there aren't a lot of companies that have measurables, goals, standards, waypoints, anything to say, hey, we're actually measuring, we have a target for inclusion. We've done these things. Here's where they wound up. Here how it compares to what our goals were. So how do you actually measure inclusion and the success of inclusion outside of just saying productivity and finances?
Yeah, and actually this was a big revelation that we had, was that we realized, I was building these computer simulations. They're like sim games, like you're literally simulating people going out the business and growing over time as the company grows over time. And what I realized is that knowing that somebody is a woman or black or has a disability or is gay is not enough. I need to know what are the day-to-day experiences of those people that impact their ability to do their work, that impact their satisfaction. And so what we ended up doing is that we developed this way of measuring what we realized eventually was measuring inclusion by asking people. So we do these workshops where we talk about these ideas, we show the computer simulations, and then we invite people to use an online platform that is completely confidential and untraceable. And we ask them to share optionally if they want some identity traits, but then we ask them to tell us about experiences of things that happened to them in the workplace. And we're very careful. We don't say things that made you feel excluded, because sometimes your feeling excluded are a blend of your personal experiences, your culture, something that upsets one person may not upset another person. So instead, we're really careful about, like, tell me, for example, okay, there was a meeting where decisions were made that impacted me and I was not invited. Or maybe it's going to be something like, I sent my laptop to IT to get it fixed and it took them 3 weeks to fix it. Now, you might say, what the hell does that have to do with inclusion? Well, if I get 100 people in the company to complain about that and 80 of them are women, then that's an example of inclusion is what you do. The company is somehow treating women differently than men. And that could have to do with compensation. It could have to do with your advancement. It could have to do with your recognition for the work that you do. So what we do is we collect these experiences and we ask them to tell us two things about each experience. What was the category? Does it have to do with compensation, with work-life balance, with recognition, with advancement? And then we ask him, what was the source? Was it your company? Was it a company policy? Was it your direct manager? Was it your leadership? Was it your customers? And with those bits of information, we get a combination of really tangible quantitative data that tells us where are the biggest problem areas? Where are the areas where you're creating obstacles for some of your employees? And then the qualitative data tells us exactly what is going on. So for example, we're finding that compensation is a big problem with a lot of people. We read the reviews and we find that a lot of people complain that their managers are using very informal methods to do their performance reviews, performance evaluations. Well, if you do that, you are not saying, again, let's find out what's wrong with this group of people that's not getting, let's find the pay gap and measure it and find out that, oh, look, queer Black women with a disability are paid, 60% of the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar compared to the white men. Instead, what you're saying is, I'm finding that the process for how you do performance evaluations is flawed. Fix it. When you fix it, the queer Black women with a disability are going to see the biggest increase and the biggest benefit, but you're also going to benefit the Black men and the gay men, and you're also going to benefit some of the white men that maybe are introverts or maybe come from a different background, whatever the case might be. And so we flip that upside down. We provide really tangible data about what is happening in your company today, and that helps you to understand exactly what things can you do to improve it, as opposed to, oh, I happen to see that we don't have enough Black people. How do we fix that? Oh, we did an inclusion survey and we find out that, lo and behold, people with disabilities are less satisfied than people without disabilities. What do we do? Oh, let's build a new elevator, right? I mean, it's like, that's what most companies do. Instead, we give them really, really tangible, microscopic level data about what is actually happening in the organization.
Have you ever done this survey and found like your golden goose, your model company where there's not a lot of negativity? The employees just feel mostly included. There's a lot of diversity, that success story before you had to do anything.
I mean, so we've certainly seen some companies and some industries that are better than others. Like, I would not want to be a woman in tech. I'll tell you, women, interestingly, we see that when we compare, we have this way of looking at overall identity traits like race and ethnicity, gender, disability. So we may do things like compare everybody who identifies as a male, versus everybody else. And that includes women, non-binary, transgender, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why we do that is because we want to try to understand, are there certain aspects of identity that are more impacted than others, right? As opposed to saying specific identity groups. And when we do that, what we find is that gender, surprisingly, because we used to think that race would be a huge differentiator. In some companies, race is a huge difference. In some, it's less so. And also these days, so many white men are complaining about DEI that we're actually seeing almost a reversal in some cases. But gender is always a problem. Being a woman in most industries, but especially in technology and to some extent in finance, is not a pretty situation. Now, we found some companies that actually were significantly better than other companies. But even for them, the goal is not, oh, let me give you a gold star and stick it to your chest that says that you're really better than anybody else. The goal is, are there ways that you can still improve? Are there things that are still happening? And I can guarantee you that I've never seen a company where women were treated the same as men. And also the other trait that tends to be very where there is a visible difference is people with disabilities. And we find that a lot of people in companies do not report their disabilities. And this is a known fact. Most companies think that they have about 4 or 5% people with disabilities. The reality, when you include invisible disabilities, is between 15 and 20%. And we see that all the time in our data. What happens is that a lot of people that have disabilities that are not visible get exposed to people making jokes about people in wheelchairs, or they get exposed to obstacles that they feel uncomfortable reporting. Hey, I have chronic pain. I need a better chair, but I feel bad going to my manager because then I have to reveal that I have a disability. And so the two areas where we always see, always, so there's no perfect company. Some are better than others. Sometimes we do comparisons of divisions within large companies, and we can say, well, this division is better about respect, but it's worse about compensation and benefits. This one has problems with recruitment and retention. This one has, so it's always more about let's find the problems and fix them. And if you're already at 80%, great, you're going to go to 85%. If you're at 60%, you're going to go to 70%. But in all cases, it's less about giving people gold stars, and it's more about what can you do to increase the satisfaction of your employees and therefore make more money.
And ultimately, you're not at 100%, so there's always room for improvement.
Always. Yeah.
I am surprised that disabilities is such a big component. I think it kind of ties into the fact that when people think or who demonize DEI do that, they don't think about the disability or even the military side of DEI as well. And so it's surprising, but it's not surprising, I should say, that disabilities are a part of that so much. I want to refer to a quote that I noted down from your TEDx. Anything that an organization does that causes someone to feel excluded because of their personal characteristics is shooting themselves in the foot. And I will tell you, my girlfriend, if she was here, she will tell you I probably will round that, just to make sure I got the quote right, but I probably will round it and listen to that section probably about 10 times. I'm probably not crediting myself enough with how many times I click back. But I wanted you to explain that quote. It seems very straightforward, right? But I wanted you to explain that quote and how you came up with this philosophy, this mindset around what organizations do and don't do and how that could shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm glad that you picked up on that. And, it's funny because a lot of the things that I talk about in my TED Talk, it's like every time that I speak, it gets smoother in the sense that I learn to sort of condense things. And that particular idea came from a realization that ultimately I recognized early on that if I'm going to convince any white male leaders, or really any corporate leaders, but especially white men, to do the right thing, I have to give them a motivation that aligns with their interests. And those interests are economic interests. I mean, ultimately, you're a CEO, you're judged on how much money you make for your shareholders. That's literally it. And so it doesn't matter how much you love DEI. Ultimately, if you get pressured because DEI is not working for you, you're going to have to throw it off the bus and do something different, right? So I knew I needed to focus on economic motivations. And so I started to think about how do experiences that people have in the organization actually impact the success of the company. And I have this analogy where imagine a team, and I say this is the perfect team where each individual is working at 100%, and as a team they work perfectly together. And now what happens if something interferes with one person's ability to do their work? And then clearly the performance will go down. And if something happens to a second person, not only are you going to lose more performance because of the individuals, but now you start to get feedback or kind of ripple effects where the other team members have to pick up the slack. They get frustrated. Maybe they deliver a project late and then their manager no longer gives them the best jobs. So all of a sudden, the performance of the whole team can decline dramatically. Now, I haven't said anything about race, gender, ethnicity, diversity, and inclusion, nothing. I just simply said, if something happens in your company that leads to some people underperforming because of reasons that have nothing to do with their qualities, they have to do with their skin color or their gender or their sexual orientation, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you have a team that is less productive. And when you put it that way, and by the way, we developed this calculator, we can literally put numbers on it. And we can go to a company and say, if you're treating this group of people differently from that group of people, here's how much money you're losing. And this is kind of like undeniable. Amazon, there was a leaked memo about 2 years ago. By their own estimate, they lose $8 billion with a B dollars every year because of unwanted employee churn. $8 billion. This is a company that made $33 billion in net profit that year. And I think that it's very typical for most companies to be losing at least 20% of their net profit simply because they do not know how to treat people the same. You flip that around and you say, if you could find what is intruding or interfering with your people's ability to succeed, and you could remove those obstacles. You can make sure that what you're doing, your inclusion, is actually inclusive. You're doing it the same for everybody. You could be saving millions of dollars every year. Potentially, if you're a big enough company, billions of dollars every year. So that's really my whole philosophy has been about, instead of leading with identity, I always lead with performance. Instead of leading with equality, I always lead with financial issues and say, in fact, in my book, the subtitle, the title is Measure Inclusion. The subtitle is Higher Profits and Happier People. And I put the higher profits person because I know my audience. They're the ones that I want to buy my product, right? I love the idea of happier people, but I know that what they care about most is money. So higher profits and happier people without guesswork or backlash. I'm giving you quantitative data, and I'm by focusing on performance and how people are able to succeed, I am getting rid of the backlash, because I'm no longer saying, let's make life better for this particular group of people. I'm doing that, but I'm doing it indirectly. I'm actually fixing the causes instead of focusing on the symptoms.
Yeah, we're going to actually get to your book in a second. First of all, that answer is about as good as the quote that I read. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Money is always the bottom line. And so I think if you can tell somebody you have this pathway, either you go left and you make money, you go right and you do not make money, I think they'll always choose the left side and do whatever they can to. But that number from Amazon is surprising. 8 billion out of and 33 net. So you're basically robbing yourself of 41 billion profit. But with the B is surprising. I think the B part is more surprising than the number, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I know your focus is on the corporate world, but in government and policy, there's almost what I would call a DEI war that's going on, something I've never seen in my lifetime. And so on the government side or policy side, do you think there's a path forward of mutual understanding of the need for DEI and the understanding of DEI for people in this country, people outside this country, but more specifically people in this country?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, but with a caveat. And I want to start by pointing out that I think right now, all of the splash that is going on with the executive orders in the government, I think honestly that DEI has become sort of a wedge that people are and I mean, look, we've seen this particular playbook before, right? I mean, politicians have figured out that if they can drive a wedge between, typically on the basis of racism, right? So if you drive a wedge between black people and white people, you can leverage that to garner votes and do things of that sort. And they're doing that very, very well. They certainly did that in the last election. But more importantly, what I'm seeing is DEI has become a bit of a red herring where they're distracting us. Because let's look at it, right? Oh, DEI is illegal. Let's eradicate illegal DEI. But are they actually doing that? No, they're firing indiscriminately all kinds of people in government because the ultimate goal is to shrink government. And so to me, they're using DEI as an excuse, and they're creating this hatred between, let's call them pro-DEI and anti-DEI people, right? Which I think is terrible. But when you talk about coming together, I think what's very important, and I apologize, but I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback in some of the language they used. It's not about explaining why DEI is so important. I think we need to take a responsibility from the DEI side to understand what aspects of what, MEI, meritocracy. I've criticized meritocracy in the past, and I'm going to continue to do so. But some of the ideas underlying what people call meritocracy are basically exactly what we want in DEI. We want anyone who's qualified for a job to have the same opportunities as anybody else to get that job. And we want to make sure that once they get into that company, if they're doing the work they're supposed to do, they can get promoted, they can get compensated, they can get recognized. I believe everybody wants that. But the problem is that when we couch it in terms of fairness, justice, equality, it immediately turns off people on that side. And when they couch in terms of meritocracy, lowering the bar, color blindness, we all get pissed off about it. So what I try to do in my writing, and I'm writing a lot of things now beyond the book, I'm saying, look, let's acknowledge the mistakes that we've made on the DI side. We've made loose definitions. We've sat there arguing about kids picking apples from trees. Like one thing that I tell people is like the kids looking over the fence, equity versus equality. I own the baseball stadium. Why the hell are these kids stealing money from me by watching the game for free? I own the apple orchard. Why the hell are these kids stealing my apples? And why should I help them to steal the apples more efficiently? If we only thought, well, maybe we should think about, I'm actually an apple orchard owner and I want to make it easier for my workers to pick those apples, right? It's like same idea, but it's like we've been very careless about the language, and the meritocracy people are doing exactly the same mistake. they're assuming that you can just tell who is a better employee, when we all know that what that means is that, oh, they went to the same school, they look like me, they speak the same language, therefore they must be better because I've been successful. And so what I try to do is I try to strip out all of the aspects of our language that is relying on assumptions that we sometimes don't even realize that we make. And I'm trying to say, what is the core, what is the nugget that we all can agree upon? And if we can do that and bring people together by using a shared language that we all agreed upon, in my opinion, that's going to be a lot easier and more fruitful than simply turning up the volume and trying to convince more the people over there to understand what we see. They will never understand what we see, but quite frankly, we will never understand what they see. And this goes back to what I say about being kind of in the middle. It's very difficult for, like, a lot of my, I love all of my colleagues in DI, but I have to say some of them that jumped in after the murder of George Floyd, they did that with the best of intentions, but they think that just knowing what it's like to have experiences qualifies them to tell CEOs what to do. And it's like, well, okay, you're qualified to explain to CEOs what the problems are, but you need to understand that that does not give them the solutions. And so I think that one of the things I'm trying to do is to try to, let's mold the language and come up with solutions that we're all going to agree upon. And maybe they will not be 100%. And maybe, yeah, it would be nice to get more recognition for the incredible injustices. Like one thing that I realized, this country is built on slavery. The slavery basically built this entire country. And a lot of white people hate hearing that. They hate hearing that. I understand that. I see it. I see it every day when I talk to people like you. It disgusts me what it's like to be a black person in America. I don't live it, but I see it enough. I live in Harlem. Many of my friends are black. It's disgusting. But I can't lead with that when I'm talking to the CEO. I can't do that. If I do that, they will immediately shut down and ignore me. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit, I'm getting kind of excited here, but I just feel like there's so much that we're doing that could be better if we just can get beyond our own assumptions and really, truly understand what the other side wants. And both sides need to do that. Right now, we're pulling people apart. I'm trying desperately to just like, hey, let's get back to the middle and let's realize that both extremes are not good. Extremes are not good in general. Let's go to that middle.
And no, it's great conversation. And I was waiting just to jump in because one of the things you said on your TEDx talk that you just said a couple seconds ago was disconnect, or at least alluded to the disconnect between understanding the problem and understanding what a solution to that problem actually is. And I think that goes hand in hand with, there are a lot of people who have good intentions, who want to see better. They completely understand the problems like you just said, but their solution is something that's not conducive to actually solving the problem. It's, it may be violence, it may be anger, it may be, when they go low, I go low. It may be that type of stuff. Whereas coming up with solutions that actually solve the problem take extreme work, take data, things I talked about before, evidence to support this is what will work, as opposed to just yelling into the wind, essentially. And so, no, I definitely, that point resonated with me because I remember watching it on your TEDx as well. That there's this, a lot of people who say they understand, but they don't know how to fix it. So
appreciate that. Yeah.
But before we move on from the Q&A part, I did want to talk about your book. You talked a little bit about it, Measuring Inclusion. Talk a little bit about that. What do you hope people get from that? I know you alluded to also working on some other pieces. So if you want to give a little preview of that as well, feel free.
Yeah. So the book, I started writing it when I could already see that the backlash was coming. And in fact, I kind of predicted, and I usually suck at predicting things, but in 2018, I wrote an article. In April of 2018, I wrote an article in which I said, if companies continue to focus on diversity as the kind of the sole target, the sole measure of progress, it will cause backlash. And I literally said it will cause white men to complain about reverse discrimination, and it may spread to other parts of society like affirmative action. And I said that in April of 2018. So it was, 2 years and 1 month before the murder of George Floyd, and it was 7 years ago. How did I guess that? Well, to me, it was pretty obvious because I could see what was happening. And so when George Floyd was murdered and this huge increase in DI came by, I was like, this is a bubble and it's going to burst, except that unlike other economic bubbles that have burst, of which I've seen multiple in the past, like the internet bubble, the neural networks bubble before that I've been involved with, I thought this is going to be terrible because there's going to be really evil people that are going to take advantage of that to create an enormous backlash that really crushes this. And unfortunately, that's happening. I wish that had been wrong, but that's happening. So when I saw that, when I could see it already like in 2023, I thought I really need to write a book because I really need to. By then, we had collected enough data, worked with enough companies, and already refined the ideas enough that I felt that I could put together a very compelling, very simple story that would, on the one hand, offer a solution, but on the other hand, also analyze critically some of the mistakes that have been made from both sides. And so the book starts with, in the introduction, I say very squarely, hey, here's why I'm writing this book. Here's why this book should be accessible and of interest to a lot of people, leaders, managers, DI practitioners, even people that are just interested in these kinds of themes. Then I talk very kind of almost like not academically, but in a very linear fashion. I talk about here's what it means, here's how we measure it, here's some data that we've collected, here's some examples of the narratives that we've heard, and then I talk about here's how you can do this in your own company. And then I have 2 chapters toward the end, one of them where I kind of take out my big stick about DI and I say, look, here's a bunch of stupid mistakes that we've all have made. And then I do the same thing for the anti-DI side. And I say, here's a bunch of really stupid things that they've been saying. And let's try to, again, it was my beginning of let's try to, reconcile things and bring them together. And so the book came out in September of 2024. And I'm very grateful that I talk about, because, I had to do a bit of soul searching. It was like, I could tell that it was going to be a disaster. I had no idea how bad it was going to be. But I could tell that DI was falling out of favor. And I was like, do I still want to talk about it? Do I want to change the language and call it talent management? I was like, no, I want to stand by DI. I want to stand by what it means. I want to stand by the values that brought me to this field, but I want to do it in a way that will try to kind of find that neutral territory. And I like to think that I was pretty successful with that. And I'm getting a ton of invitations to speak precisely because of my TED Talk and my book, which really show how you can kind of defuse the anger and the polarization and bring people together. And the stuff that I'm working on right now is... there is a part of the book where I just mentioned kind of in passing the idea that if you think of your human assets the way that you think about your financial assets, when you manage finances in a company, you have 3 statements that people normally use. You use your balance sheet that tells you a snapshot of where you are right now. Then you have the P&L that tells you where you're losing money and gaining money over time, over let's say a quarter or a year. And then you have the cash flow that tells you day to day, where are you spending money, where are you making money. So now let's think about that in terms of people. The diversity of a company is like the balance sheet. It's a snapshot in time of where you are today, but it doesn't tell you how you got there. It just tells you where you are today. The cash flow is what I call inclusion. It's the day-to-day in and out that happens to people that increase and decrease their value to you as an organization. What's that middle layer? Well, the P&L is what I've been calling equity, right? It's the idea that you look for disparities in promotions, job assignments, opportunities for training, and things of that sort. And if you see that there is an imbalance, if there's inequity, you want to drive it to 0. Well, guess what? There is another way to call that. It's called merit. So now what I'm doing is I'm working on a book with a very dear friend of mine, Cynthia Overton, who's been a tremendous help in throughout my journey. And we're writing the book in which we talk about this idea we call the MIME, M-I-M-E, which stands for Measuring Inclusion and Merit for Efficiency. So you see what I'm doing there, right? I'm coming to the middle. I'm recognizing that, look, our ultimate goal is to make efficient companies. More productivity, more money. Do you want to be efficiency? And that's what, Doge and all that other stuff is all about, right? And you're not just measuring inclusion, but you're also measuring merit. And that speaks to the fact that, yeah, ultimately we all want a meritocracy, but you damn well put numbers on it, because otherwise meritocracy is just an ideology. And so I'm trying to kind of bring all these pieces together. And with my friend, we're writing this book that we're hoping to get out in a few months. We're self-publishing because we want to get it out quickly, in which we build on the work that was in the first book and really paint like a whole picture of how companies can think about managing people the way that they're managing finances. And then that'll feel much more natural, much more familiar to leaders. And then we'll give them the recipes for here is what you measure at the low level, here's what you measure at the middle level, here's what you measure at the top level.
So amazing work, I think. MIME, I got to write that down. Measuring
inclusion, measuring inclusion and merit for efficiency.
Okay.
So,
I like that.
I'm about to publish, I've been publishing these LinkedIn posts that have bits and pieces of what's going to be in the book. And my next one is going to be introducing this idea of the MIME framework. But I wanted to kind of build it up and really think carefully about how do we position this in a way that actually makes sense to people? And how do we come up with an acronym that people can pronounce and that actually will not piss anybody off? Right?
That's actually really important.
It's marketing. It's marketing. You know it, right? You can have the best idea in the world, but if you have a crappy name or if you don't market it properly, it ain't going to work. So
it's like Doge, but we won't go there right now.
Yeah. It was painful to mention that, but yes.
Yeah. All right, so that's all for the Q&A segment with my guests, and now we'll move to First Thoughts. Before we get to First Thoughts is brought to you by the Live Podcast Network. Dave's Head Podcast is now part of the Live Podcast Network, home for Black voices, where community, culture, and creatives live. Dave's Head Podcast adds to the catalog of over 70 titles available in the Live Podcast Network and app for both iOS and Android. Check out Dave's Head Podcast and many others in the Live Podcast app, the home of Black voices. And so the way First Thoughts works for those who are joining for the first time, like I always say, shame on you, but I'm happy you're here. First Thoughts offers me an opportunity to provide my guests with a word or a phrase to get their first thoughts. Obviously, they're not privy to this because it would ruin the whole feature of First Thoughts. So, Paolo, you ready for some First Thoughts?
I'll take my chances here.
All right, I like to start with a softball one all the time, so we'll go TEDx. If I say TEDx, what's your first thought?
Visibility. It's just getting a tremendous amount of exposure to a lot of really, really interesting people.
Okay. And next first thought, woke versus anti-woke. What's your first thought?
I'll never, ever define myself as woke. That's something that somebody else should tell me. And I hate the way that woke has become a negative term. I'm going to say one quick little thing. I invited myself to give a guest lecture in a course that was titled Woke Ideology. I literally walked into the Lion's Den and I tried to explain to them why it's particularly offensive to take a word like that and turn it into a negative. But yeah, so misunderstanding, if I had to just use in a word, I would say woke versus anti-woke, a lot of misunderstanding.
I'm curious, how did that conversation go once you conveyed your opinion?
So it was a graduate course. It was in London, actually. There were maybe a dozen people, maybe 15. And let's just say afterward, initially we're very defensive. By the end of that, we went out to dinner, we're having drinks, and we were like, oh my God, this stuff is so great. You should go talk to Joe Rogan. You should explain your stuff. Now, you know what I said about code switching? I probably said some things in that class that if you had been listening, you might have been a little bit annoyed if you didn't know the kind of the backstory. Because I was very blunt about, a lot of the stuff that's going on in the eye is bullshit. You know, it's like, I can say that in certain contexts, but it went really well. And the thing is, I like to think that I changed some minds. I like to think that I actually helped to bring some people back toward the middle. And so it was a good exercise for me. It was very successful, I would say.
Okay. So I had a whole different last first thought for you, but I'm going to change it up just based on the conversation we had. And so I'm going to ask you a question. If you could rewrite your book, Measuring Inclusion, that you wrote last year, this year, how would it be different?
I would definitely talk about the political climate and how that's impacting DEI and how that's creating this massive polarization. I think that was not quite as evident when I wrote it. And I think I would take that head on and be a bit more direct about it. But other than that, it's more that I want to add to it, which is why I'm writing the second book. I think there needs to be more beyond that initial level, but otherwise that would be the biggest thing is that political climate.
Okay. I was just curious as we were talking. I was thinking, I wonder, the things you're just saying, and we kind of got into a little bit of what's going on now, and I just thought in my head, I was like, I wonder how his book would be different if he wrote it today versus last year.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. Appreciate that.
All right. So that's all for First Thoughts. And what I started doing last season was T.O. First Thoughts, which is named after my girlfriend /T.O. It's a nickname that I'll never share with anyone publicly, what it means. But what it does, it offers an opportunity for you, my guest, Paolo, to offer me a first thought to get what's on my mind, what's in my head. So if you had a first thought for me, what would it be?
I would say the future.
Wow. So that's a very, very broad one, but in the context of what we're talking about, it's got a cloud over it. Just because we're, to use the word polarized, we're so polarized and so, we're on our side of the line where our backs are against the fence and we're all just pointing daggers at each other at this point. I don't see, at least in the near future, because of that cloud that's there, I don't see how we move past this and get to a steady state of coexisting as just simple human beings. You being a human, me being a human, and we exist and have a happy life. That's the purpose. One of the things I talk about is one of my sayings, which is enjoy life because life should be fun. All this polarization, all this DEI, woke versus anti-woke, takes away from the ability to just enjoy life, because simple conversations with your friends, with family, with coworkers, become so elevated just with simple topics that just shouldn't be, controversial. My ability to live, your ability to make choices for yourself, and for your family. Everything at this point is so polarizing and so attacking. It makes it difficult to see past today what tomorrow could be, So
Yeah.
that would be my first thought.
No, I appreciate that. And I completely hear you. And I get that sense a lot from friends from all walks of life. So I completely agree. Right now, things are gloomy, and I do hope they get better.
I do too. I think part of the difficulty is we all want solutions. To your point about understanding the problem versus understanding what the solution is, I think we all understand various aspects of what the problem is in society today. None of us, or very few of us, have solutions, and the ones that actually do, people don't seem to listen to anyway. So it's a circular problem that we're kind of stuck in. I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan. Star Trek: The Next Generation, one of the greatest shows ever.
More of the older ones, but look at all my gray hair, right? It's like I watched a lot of the original ones, but then sort of, but I do love like Picard and those that next generation people that were pretty awesome too.
One of the episodes that stands out in my mind is the episode they were recording a time trap, where their ship, the Enterprise, was basically exploding. They couldn't figure out why, so they would constantly get to the point where the ship would explode, and then time would revert itself back, and they'd be taken to the same point over and over again. We haven't gotten to the explosion, I don't think, yet, but we're kind of stuck in this time trap, I think, where we get to a certain point and we kind of reset back to the original point. We just get worse and worse every time. And maybe we will get to the explosion one day. I hope not. But I feel like we're just kind of stuck in a loop. The time, what are they called? The news cycles, they kind of repeat at this point.
Yeah.
Right? There's no new positive news. There's no new negative news. It's kind of the same positive and negative news all the time. So I'm hopeful that at some point, we break this time loop and we, like I said, coexist as humans who just enjoy life, because life should be fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think we will. It's just a question of, how long and then how deep is the cycle going to go in the other direction? How far is that pendulum, how far the pendulum is swung this time is frightful. How quickly and how far we can make it go back in the other direction remains to be seen. But, as you said, finding solutions, I like to think that I have some interesting solutions. And as you said, sometimes it's about getting heard, which is why I'm so grateful that you invited me to speak with you, because anyone that I can get my word out to, regardless of what, how they identify, regardless of what they, my belief is that there are solutions out there, and we just need to be patient, but we also need to be very vocal about it. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do. So again, very, very grateful to have spoken to you.
Absolutely. Paolo, I do want to thank you for stepping into Dave's head. And as I always do before my guests depart, I'd like to offer you the opportunity. If there's anything you'd like to talk about or promote, feel free to do so now.
All I can say is I would certainly be happy if anybody wanted to buy my book. I mean, Measuring Inclusion, there's only one of them. So on Amazon or anywhere you want to. And also, if anybody that works for an organization, whether it's a company or a nonprofit or whatever, invite me to speak. And I usually charge for that. But especially if it's a nonprofit or a school, I'd love to get out there and talk about these ideas. And so if anybody's interested in hearing me more or reaching out to me, I'm very easy to find online. LinkedIn is a very easy way to find me. There are not too many Paolo Gaudianos out there. And but other than that, I hope that people will read the book and help to spread the word.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for stepping into Dave's head. As I try to say, and if I can remember correctly, with all my guests this year, may every tomorrow be the best day of your life. I think that's what I say. I can't forget my own saying. It's crazy. My favorite segment of my podcast is my GRIN, which stands for Great Reason to Be in Love with Now. I feel like every episode this season so far, there's something I've got to make clear or state before I get into my GRIN. Whether it's skipping first thoughts and deal first thoughts or butchering something. Been a lot of corrections this year. I'm the humanist of human this season. I keep forgetting somehow my catchphrase that I want to say to my guests as the interview winds down, and we close that segment. I keep butchering it somehow. And here's the actual words that I've finally written down for what I want to say to them. May every today be the best day of your life. May every today be the best day of your life. It seems very, very simple to remember, but for some reason it's difficult. Even the first time I said it during episode 2 with my guest, I messed it up and had to restate it. And it just seems to be a thing this season. Hopefully, we'll do better next episode. But 2025 so far has been a robustness of activity for me, from professionally to personal and other activities, including fraternity. Now, I'm marginally good at recognizing the signs of burnout in myself. For the record, marginally, the definition, it means to only a small extent. And so, to a small extent, I'm good at recognizing the signs of burnout in myself. It's an important thing to possess, that quality self-awareness to recognize the signs of impending burnout, or in progress burnout even. Healthline.com discussed in an article entitled 12 Signs You Need to Take a Break ASAP that symptoms of burnout can vary from person to person. That means, or that many times, by the time you lie down for the night, your head is spinning with an endless to-do list that only keeps growing. And so I'll go through the 12 things that they identify as signs that you need to take a break ASAP, or another way to put it, 12 things you need to recognize as signs that you may be either in progress burning out or about to burn out. Number 1, you're restless. And I'll reveal some intimate secrets or intimate things going on with me during this segment. If any of these apply to me, I'll raise my hand or I'll say, check. Number 1, you're restless. When you finally do attempt to relax, you have a hard time sitting still or quieting your mind. This can make it hard to recharge when you need it most. Raising my hand, check. I've been restless recently, to the point, and I'll get to the effect of that restlessness, but I've been restless a lot lately when it's time to relax, quiet my mind, take some time, wind down. And so I've taken some steps to, and I'll talk about some of those steps at the end of this. I've taken some steps to kind of alleviate some of these things or work around some of these things or address these things is probably a better way to put it. But if you're restless, again, you can't quiet your mind. It makes it hard to recharge. It makes it hard to sleep. It makes it hard to even be in the moment. Number 2, you're awake at all hours of the night. That's the effect of number 1 for me. So check. Sleep is one of the first things to suffer when you get stressed or overwhelmed. Take notice if you're staying up extra hours trying to finish a project or begin waking up at odd hours without being able to fall back asleep. For me, it's been the latter of the two. Waking up at 3, 3:30, 4, 4:30, and being up for the rest of the day, 90% of the time. There's a rare occasion, I'd say 10%, where I try to force myself to go back to sleep. Usually is 6:30, get another hour of sleep, and then I feel excruciatingly drained. Because me and naps, we don't work well together. But that's the effect of the cause of me being restless. Knowing I have 15 things I want to do the next day, or 15 things I want to do the next week, or 15 things that are just on my mind. And so while I may get to sleep at a normal time, those 15 things return back in the form of dreams or form of partially waking me up. And then, or if I just happen to wake up because, I don't know, a cricket cricked somewhere and it just happened to partially wake me up, the first thing that I wake up with in my mind is that list of 15 things. So be conscious of that as well. Number 3, you're eating differently. In some cases, you might notice yourself eating less than usual or skipping meals without realizing it. Or you might find that you're eating more than usual and always on the hunt for a snack, even if you aren't hungry. Both scenarios can be a sign of stress. Now, I will say, I have been craving chips a lot lately. But I don't, and I'm self-diagnosing here, I don't think it's related to me in this context. I think it's me being greedy. I get in these phases where I just want to eat certain things. It's just been the way I've always been. Like a week and a half ago, I think it was, I just got a lunch meat craving. So I bought a pound and a half of turkey, some pepper jack cheese, some wraps, and I've been making wraps for, I don't know, about a week or so now. I just get in this phase where I want to eat certain things. Fig Newtons. Been in this thing recently with Fig Newtons. It's just one of those things. I don't think in my context of this conversation, me eating differently is just the way I operate. Sometimes I don't want to eat Fig Newtons at all. Sometimes I don't want to eat chips. Right now I'm in the chips phase. So we'll see how long that lasts. Number 4, you have no motivation. Dragging yourself to your job or losing interest in things you once enjoyed can mean you reach the point of burnout. High stress levels can turn activities you once enjoyed into monotonous tasks you do out of obligation. Now, I won't hear or raise my hand on this one. However, I will say the first line, dragging yourself to your job, or I'll say more globally, sometimes dragging myself to whatever the responsibility is, whether it's working out, whether it's work itself, whether it's, getting up for an appointment or whatever. That has been the case sometimes. The thing with me when I work out, I usually try to work out first thing in the morning, gets the blood going, if you ever done HIIT or highly intense interval training, I think is what the acronym stands for. You know that if you do it in the morning, you continue to burn, depending on what you're working on and how intensive you are, you continue to burn calories even after you work out, which is one of the beautiful things about HIIT training. But some days I don't feel like doing it, and I literally have to drag myself out of bed, throw on my workout gear, go to my workout area, start my videos, and then once I get started, I'm ready to go. The blood starts flowing, I'm good to go. But that initial activation to go do that, sometimes I don't feel like it. So I would say not me. I wouldn't check myself on that one. Number 5, you're sick all the time. Frequent illness may be a sign that stress is having an impact on your immune system. Too much stress may lower your body's ability to fight off infection. Now, knock on wood, I have not been really sick in I can't remember last time I was sick. But I do know and notice in the past, sometimes when I get overworked, and depending on environment, people, whatever I'm around, as strong as my immune system may be, you get bombarded with stressors and you get bombarded with people who are coughing on you or, just not 100% themselves. And I might fall susceptible to some things. I will say this is also one of those susceptible times of year for me because I turned 40 or 35, whatever it was, and suddenly I developed allergies. And so I know in the spring when things bloom, me being overworked or about to be burnt out is not a good recipe for me surviving that indoctrination of this year's allergies into my system or whatever triggers me into my system. And so being highly strong immune system, ready to go when spring rolls around, puts me in a better position to handle that initial shock of the thing that I'm allergic to that sends my body into a tailspin for like 48 hours. Number 6, you feel zapped of energy. Excessive stress can leave you feeling physically and mentally exhausted, even after 9 hours of sleep, which I rarely get. Or your usual workout is feeling extra difficult, even though nothing's changed. Now, I'll say this. I won't do it here. I'll do it here. I have felt zapped of energy sometimes randomly in the past couple weeks. Now, sometimes I go have a long day at work. I sit on my couch. My couch is called Brutus because he just knocks you out. And I think part of that is my body finally relaxing, my mind finally relaxing, disconnecting from whatever is going on. And then my body says, let's sleep. And because Brutus is a knockout artist, that makes it so much worse. And so that's where I'll say I've been zapped of energy sometimes. Now, the workout side, I just talked about that. Now, to me, I separate dragging yourself and you not being in the mood to work out, and then your energies come up and you're good to go for your workout versus the entire workout feels harder. I haven't felt that at all. Usually once I get going, now I try to push myself a lot. So that in itself makes the workout harder because your job is to push yourself to your limits when you're working out. But the combination of those two, being low energy and workouts being harder, haven't felt that. Number 7, you have a hard time concentrating. No one is immune to mild forgetfulness on off days from time to time. But if you find that your usual tasks are taking longer or feel harder to get through, you may have too much on your plate. Now, I wouldn't say I have a hard time concentrating. I will say my mind does 15 things at the same time. And I keep using this number 15, but that's because sometimes that's how it feels. Even right now while I'm recording, I'm thinking about the next 2 things I got to do. Actively, I can tell you that for sure. Number 8, you feel indifferent about your life. It's normal to feel a bit down every once in a while when it comes to your work and other responsibilities, but you shouldn't constantly feel demoralized by what you do. Your daily activities and tasks should give you a sense of satisfaction and achievement after completing them. I'll do it here. I won't do it here. I'll do it here. And I would only caveat that by saying I don't think indifference the word that I feel. Apathetic, maybe, unmotivated sometimes. And definitely not about my life, about certain aspects of my life. There's definitely, and I actually would use the word indifferent. There's an indifference about certain aspects of my life, certain components, things that are going on. And there's really like two things. But if there's 50 things going on in my life, there's really like two things I feel indifferent about right now. And people in my life, there's no surprise here. Nobody's going to listen to this episode and go, oh my God, are you okay? No, they pretty much know the two things that I'm talking about. So, number 9, you're getting cynical or negative. You may not even know what you're mad about, just that you're in a permanent state of cranky. And to give a couple examples, have you become increasingly impatient with coworkers lately? Do you have frequent outbursts after a challenging day? Have you screamed or snapped at an innocent bystander and felt shocked afterwards? Yes, no, and no for me. So I'll go here, but not here for sure. And again, what I become cynical and negative about, people in my life know exactly what that is. Number 10, you're withdrawn. That's me. Solo time is important and necessary, but when you're under a lot of stress, it can isolate you and potentially damage your relationships. Think about this. Do you normally go out and get, now I'll caveat by saying I usually, for a long period of time, Tuesdays was taco day. Taco Tuesday, I was making tacos, I was going to get tacos, I was having tacos with friends, I was going to friends' house for tacos. It was like a 9-month straight thing where tacos were involved every Tuesday. It started during COVID. I actually ordered the tacos, a huge box of them, because 1, we couldn't leave the house, and 2, I wanted to make sure I had a bunch of supply on deck for when I just randomly chose to eat tacos. But on that same token, do you normally go out with friends for tacos on Tuesday, and now you don't feel like doing it anymore? You'd rather sit at home on your couch. Do you normally have dinner with associates? Do you normally do things in public with people around you, but you're not doing those anymore because what is more comfortable and pleasing to you is not being around anyone? That's you being withdrawn. Talk to someone, because they may take it personally. They may think it has something to do with them when it really is about you. Number 11, you're self-medicating. And this could be many ways. Do you fix yourself with a quick drink as soon as you walk in the door after work, or keep marijuana in your back pocket for your commute home? We'll put a pin in that one and come back to that one. There's nothing wrong with doing this from time to time, but make sure you're not relying on drugs or alcohol as a tool for coping with stress. I'll add in there food also can be a coping mechanism for dealing with stress. Certain activities, maybe you have guilty pleasures that you've ramped up, and that's your medication that you're using to self-medicate. And I found this comical when I read this article, and so I knew I was going to talk about this, but I think it's a bad idea to keep marijuana in your back pocket anyway, whether you're going to work and, stepping outside to toke a joint, or driving home, toking a joint to blow out, pun intended, the stress of your day. Marijuana is legal in whatever X number of states. It's your life. Do what you want. Partake. Who hasn't? Do it in safety of your home or some environment where you're not getting yourself potential legal trouble, job trouble, whatever trouble. I thought that was an interesting line. Keeping one in your back pocket for your commute home. Are we talking about while you're driving? Anyway. Number 12. You aren't enjoying your favorite things. Losing interest in things you once loved is a telltale sign that something is not quite right. If going to the movies or dining out with friends was once fulfilling but has started to feel pointless, it's time to take a step back. Feeling apathetic about things you once loved can be a sign of burnout, but it also can be a symptom of depression. And I'm happy they brought depression into this. I'm a little disappointed they waited until the 12th one to introduce it. And maybe I missed it somewhere. during my reading and copying and pasting and preparing for this episode, but I didn't notice the word depression put in until the 12th one, which I thought you could go back and apply depression also to some of these things, if not all of them, to tell you the truth. And so bottom line, everyone, and I mean everyone, needs a break from time to time. Even me, even keel, steady Eddie, let's get it, go, come on, Dave, needs a break from time to time. But it can be hard to recognize when it's time to hit pause, or sometimes even stop. If you find yourself feeling a bit off or doing things differently than you used to, you may need a break from your daily grind. Daily grind can involve relationships, your job, your personal activities, whatever, family, some combination, or all the above. And so evaluate not just the things that are in your face all day, like your job or your spouse or your family. Evaluate everything inside and outside your house, inside and outside your professional life, inside and outside your social life. Evaluate all those things, because you may need a break from one or two of those sections of your life, or every section of your life. You also may need to evaluate what those sections bring for you and whether they're worth keeping. And I'm not putting it out there about relationships or family or job or friends. I'm not telling you to quit or drop any of those things. I'm telling you to be self-aware to the point where you're recognizing when the path or journey is done with any one of those things, so that you maintain your health, your mental capacity, your mental peace. That's all. But also keep in mind that 12 things that were mentioned in this article, many of them overlap with depression. And if you feel that this has gone from burnout to depression to serious issue, please absolutely reach out to a friend, a colleague, a spouse, and someone professionally. Burnout isn't just, what a car does with some tires and leaves marks on the street. Burnout can be dangerous to your health, to your mental, to your physical, all that. So please, if you have found that these 12 things in any number resonate with the way your life exists today, reach out to a friend or someone professional. I want to thank Paolo Gaudiano, entrepreneur, speaker, and author, for stepping into Dave's head. And while we've had multiple conversations with multiple guests about DE&I, and I know there may be, I keep using this word, apathy around the topic, I think it's absolutely important to talk about the damage being done to a lot of this country and even around this world, because the misinformation, the ignorance, or malicious actions of people who want to demonize DE&I. We have to have these conversations. We have to understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion are. And I thought Paolo did an amazing job of communicating and describing the true essence of those words, just like my other guests have done as well. And so I thank Paolo for coming on, and check out his TEDx, please. It's a not a long video. I think it's about 20 minutes. It really opens your eyes to the problem DEI and the lack of solutions with DEI. So again, thanks Paolo for stepping to Dave's head. Check out his website, www.aleria, aleria.tech, TECH/Paolo-Gaudiano. And you can check him out on LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn /n/PGA Diano. So PGA like golf, and then UDIANO. And check out his book, Measuring Inclusion, at Aleria, aleria.tech/MI book. Lastly, as I started last year and continue this year, I'm going to leave you a quote to summarize this episode. Fittingly, this quote has to do with win. And it's by William James, who is an American philosopher and psychologist. and was the first educator to offer a psychology course in the United States. His quote goes like this: "Most people never run far enough on their first win to find out they've got a second." Now, ironic that we had a conversation about burnouts just a short time ago, and we're talking about getting past your first win to get your second. In many ways, that can contradict the conversation we're having, because if you're burnt out on your first one, you shouldn't probably go seeking a second. However, you won't learn how far you can go if you don't test yourself. And so it's a delicate balance between pushing too far and spawning growth. Pushing too far and spawning growth. That's William James, the American philosopher and psychologist. So summer peak, inclusion, and breaks. All great reasons to be in love with now. That's all for this episode of Dave's Head. If you enjoyed this episode, I'm sure you'll love similar content in the Alive Podcast Network app. Plus, you can support this podcast and enjoy ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts. Download the iOS or Android app, become a member, and experience unlimited access to Black-hosted content week after week. Follow, like, and or subscribe to this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and or X at Dave's Head Pod, and on YouTube at Dave's Head Podcast. For more information and links to all things Dave's Head, check out our website at daveshead.card.co. Episodes premiere on the 2nd and 4th Fridays of the month. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, enjoy life because life should be fun. Take care.